We are working on a project to clarify our water. We're going to take this grain silo here and turn it into a clarifying tank, and I'm going to walk you through how we're going to do it. So this will be a continuous clarifying tank, continuous system where flocculant is mixed in with the tailings, and we're going to have clean water overflow through the top back into our rubber lined pond, and then we can recirculate it or put it back into a tank. We're hoping to be able to salvage around 90%, 95% of our water if that's possible, and we're going to have a flocculant in there. I'll tell you more about that on another video, but it's going to have time to mix with the tailings, and then once it reaches up into the clarifying tank, it's going to start its process. I used SketchUp software to draft up this 3D model of the clarifying tank. So the silo will look similar to this illustration when I'm done, but not exactly like it. The tailings after the sand screw will be pumped up into the center column of the tank that you see here in the center. And the water will have no choice but to travel down the center column. And the bottom of that column is shaped like a bell. So the water will have to travel down, descending down the center of the column, outside of the bell, and we'll have to start ascending up the outside of the column. When it does that, it's too much energy for the suspended colloidal particles, so they start dropping out to the bottom of the tank, and clean water starts ascending to the top where it pours out a 4-inch pipe back into our pond, or back into a tank, keeping it a closed loop system. From the moment that the slurry is pumped into the center column, it will take an hour and 15 minutes before it pours out as clean water, clear water, over the top of the tank down a 4-inch pipe back into our pond or back into a tank. I've tested several flocculants, and they work between 4 minutes to 15 minutes, depending on several factors such as pH and concentration, but I'll get into that on a separate video. The other option we had was to build a concrete pond that you can just drive a piece of heavy equipment in there, such as a skid steer or a loader, or use a mini excavator to shovel out the tailings. But our water loss would be far greater if we used this technique. This is a pretty common practice, but again, when you're out in the desert and you want to save every drop of water you have, this isn't the best setup. So looking back at this tank, I need to add more support. I need to add some legs, additional legs. There'll be another 4 legs. I'm going to be welding up some cross support sections to those legs. I need to cut this off, and this is going to reduce down to a 4-inch elbow. We're gonna have a valve there. This project's gonna take longer than I want because I just can't stay at it for days at a time. I also have a day job I gotta manage, so you'll probably see me changing clothes constantly throughout this video. That's because it's different days that I'm working on this project. These metatarsal guards come in handy, protecting the top of the feet. I'm using soapstone or one of those crayons just to make marks on the tank on where I want to cut. Sharpies tend to get dull, or especially if the steel's dirty, Sharpies don't last long. So that's what I'm using. The first thing I have to do is cut off the upper portion of the ladder on top of the tank. Next, I need to cut off the raised section of the silo, leaving 6 inches of steel, and I'm using a Makita jigsaw with a metal blade to do this. I'm going to repurpose this steel for the lower section of the column that will be in the center of the tank. I'm using a chain to try to secure the steel that I'm about to cut off. It's a lot of weight. I don't want it knocking me over or dropping too hard, so I'm going to go ahead and secure that. Now to make the final cut. So using this little Makita jigsaw with the metal blade, I was able to cut off the very top of the grain silo. It's about 14 gauge steel right there, pretty thin, pretty easy to cut that. So what I'm going to do, I want this to be square, a 90-degree angle with the side, and so this has got to fold in. In order for this to fold in, I'm going to have to cut a small section out so that when it folds, it meets together, and then weld it. And so I got to do that all the way around. That way it is perfectly set for a 90-degree angle, and it's going to be hard to describe, so just keep watching. It'll make sense as it comes together. We determined that we can do 13 cuts around the entire silo. So I had made marks all the way around as to where we're gonna cut. On the topic of safety, you know, when cutting, because the tank is laying down sideways like this, when I go to make these cuts, it starts collapsing in on itself. So I've got to clamp and stabilize the tank, and I also have to be careful when cutting that, you know, the blade can pinch, and then that cutoff wheel can go, you know, breaking off into many pieces. So trying to prevent that from happening. Okay, now this gives you a better idea of what's going on. You know, this is at an angle that I need to bring down to a 90-degree. So now that I have them cut and bent to 90 degrees, then I'll be able to tack weld these together and continue that all the way around the tank. I had to stand the tank up, level out the tank, and fabricate up my own scaffold to work off of. And I clamped and tack welded that steel to the legs. And I have to get up pretty high, about 11 feet, to do any work on the top of the tank. Since I'm outdoors, and I don't think I'll get a good weld with gas with a light breeze or in windy conditions, so I'm using this flexible arc welder, and it's a good little welder. I like it. It's a little 20 amp unit and doing the job on this 14 gauge steel that I'm using. Not a bad little unit. Now I'm going to cut the jagged baffles for the top of the tank and also the long 6-inch rips. That will be used for the overflow channel to discharge clean water out of the 4-inch pipe. Alright, so I wanted to give you an update on how the tank is coming along. Take a look at the overflow ports. Water will overflow from here, and we're going to have the 4-inch pipe coming out here and draining the clean water. So this will be going all the way around the inside of the tank. I need to go ahead and weld continuous beads all the way around this tank and keep chugging along. Okay, so I cut a 4" by 6" nipple in half. It's clamped on, ready to weld. Now I'm going to go ahead and tack weld it. And now to weld it and finish it off. This is the overflow port here. It's a 4" nipple that I had cut and welded. And here's our elbow. Now to get it installed along with the remaining 6" rips going around the entire top of the tank. This is going to be the channel where our clean water flows out through this 4" port. This will help us run tonnage that we so desperately need. I'm going to work on this part of the project now. I got to clean up the metal and I have to prep this steel right here. And basically I need to bend it so that it can fit on top of that tank. In order to bend this, I need to cut little lines so that it can fold in on itself a lot easier. Then I can, clean the metal up. Let's go ahead and work on this section now. Alright, so this was not easy to mount. I had to cut it in half just to work with it a little bit easier. Got some magnets on the other side, clamped it on, tack welded it, and now I'm doing a continuous weld around to make sure that none of the silty water escapes and starts going up the clean water side too early. I want as much time on the underside as possible for the flocculant to work. So I have this half nearly done. I've got that other half over there to install. So I'm going to get this welded up and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. In order to raise this column up right on top of the tank, I welded on 2 hook points for the rigging. And getting it up there is going to be a challenge. That's going to be about 12 feet to the top of the tank. So I've got to raise it about 16, 17 feet in the air. So that'll be an interesting feat of engineering. Looking forward to that. All right, so I finished the welds all the way around the tank. I'll go ahead and I'll show you that. And then I started taking my scaffolding planks off and I'm moving them up top so I can start working on the framing for the center column that's here. So let's go up and I'll show you what I'm working on. So let me get up here. Okay, now we're up top And I've got these brackets right here that I'm going to be welding. I'm going to be welding these brackets here so that when I go to lift that center column, it lands right on top of there, and I'll be able to easily weld both sides and the top. This is going to be flush here, and then we'll eventually have catwalk on here and some railing. This gives you an idea of what the tank looks like so far. Still a lot of work ahead. Then I got to come up with some crane mechanism up here that's going to be pretty tall. It's going to be about 6 to 7 feet higher than the top of this tank, so that I can not only raise the column from the ground, but then I got to lower it straight down into the tank. And yeah, it's about 102 right now, but there's a breeze, so it feels pretty good. All right, back to work. I may have lost all the footage for installing that cross support. I don't know why, but the memory card has to be formatted every so often, and it might have erased some of my footage, which is upsetting. So I'm going to show you what I did. So here's what I built. Like a little head frame just to tie a rope off to the center. And what I'm going to do is tie it to maybe the back of my vehicle, close to that gate, raise it up, and then lower it down into the center of the tank, and then I've got to weld it in place. I have these brackets, if you can see, on the opposite corner and right here. Looking from this angle, I used 3-inch angle. I welded rebar on the inside of this so it can just drop down into the existing angle. Then I tack welded that angle, and I tack welded the other side. I'll go ahead and I'll show you that next. Yeah, likewise over here, I have it installed there. Same thing, rebar inside this angle, drop down, tack welded there, and then welded the cross. It's a tube, 2-inch tubing, welded to the 3-inch angle. And then I got some kickers for support. All right, so here's what's next. So I'm going to first use some rust reformer, and then I'm going to use Flex Seal rubberized coating. So I'm going to use some rust reformer on the inside of this, and then the rubberized coating. So I'm going to get that applied now. I got all my pieces cut. Now to get them installed on our column. Tell you where I'm at. Before we install this, I gotta build a ladder out of rebar and then get inside that tank. I want to just hook it on, climb down. I gotta clean the rusty metal inside the tank, and there's a dent. You can't see it right now, but there's a dent. I gotta push that out and secure it, and then yeah, clean the metal. Then we're ready to coat the bottom with rubber. Once that's dry, then I can install this. So we're getting there. This is a massive project. I ended up bending some rebar. I'm making a short ladder that can just hook on the inside of the tank so I can climb down and do some work. I don't have a short ladder here on site, I'd rather make it out of steel than wood, so that's what I'm doing. I'm using the hitch on my truck to go ahead and just bend the steel, and it doesn't have to be too precise, but I am duplicating it. All of my pipe benders and rebar benders are up at the mill site, so I gotta do it a crude way, but it's working. The ladder I just fabricated up and just hooks on, rest against the back. Now to give it a test run. All right, so I'm now standing in the tank. I can get in and out a lot easier, so this works great. Now I can clean the tank out, get the rust off, put on a rubber coating, and then after that, we'll be ready to install the column. If you're interested in learning how to weld, look at the Weldors Workshop that Weldors Supply and Steel offers. So take a look at their website. Thank you, Paul, for sponsoring MineOperator. We appreciate your support. Without it, we wouldn't be able to get this tank done. We're gonna have an awesome season coming up here, and excited about the episode with Gold Rush's Mine Rescue with Freddie and Juan. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for part 2, and thanks for watching.